Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
Hello and good evening to everybody. This is our Clause channel where we have the strategic front lines, where we are happy that we have such an eminent panel with us. And we invite all our viewers to ask as many questions as possible, because the idea is to keep this going, like to keep it as lively as possible, because we have the subject which we are discussing itself is enough to puzzle most of us. So it is going to be a rather an exercise in deciphering what President Trump is up to. So it's something nobody else has done so far, but we hope we can go some way in going forward on this. What we're looking at right now is this. I mean, the most immediate news item which we saw is, of course, but oh, sorry, let me first introduce our guests. We've got, actually, they don't need any introduction, but nonetheless, here we go. Ambassador Meera Shankar, whom I think most of us know on various TV channels, who has served in very key diplomatic postings, including India's ambassador to the United States. So she should give us some very good insights on this, where she played a very, very crucial role in Indo-US strategic ties and in framing the whole conversation. Vivek Mishra, of course, is the Deputy Director, again, someone whom everybody knows, Deputy Director at the Strategic Studies Programs at ORF. So, and we have our DG, again, a regular podcaster on this, is in this channel, Lieutenant General Dushin Singh, who is going to be he's going to sort of lead this whole discussion. I'll just bring in the subject to begin with. So what we are now looking at right now is this meeting of these generals. What we can't call it Night of the Generals, but it was in the daytime. But nonetheless, it was equally startling that he had this huge number of very senior people all in one room, where President Trump gave this rambling speech about, repeated himself and did all his, the things that he's pretty well known for. And he also spoke of how it will be used he's going to use the military for defense inside the country. That is your primary role. It's going to be used in terms of the biggest threat is from within the country. All that is kind of backed by the defense budget, the proposed defense budget, where he's asked for an increase in defense spending, not only defense spending to 1 trillion, but also on homeland security. Peter Hegseth, however, though he was, of course, far more balanced in his approach, and he did say, though he also urged the members, all that is now in the media, that he was talking to the generals of saying how you should, support the cause, the political cause. It was all very political, which is normally quite unlike what a defense secretary would say. But he also said that he will talk about the China threat in a different speech. So it's not as if that is off the table, though most of us looking at these two speeches would be completely dismayed at the way things are going, where US forces are aimed inside. It's all very inward looking. It's very extremely strange to most of us who have watched the US as a very, very energetic, thriving democracy. With that, I will open the floor and perhaps ask General Dushin Singh, who probably is not here. But Ambassador Shankar, would you like to start on your thoughts on, just where is this going?
Well, it's, I think in line with the kind of priorities that President Trump has been outlining domestically during his second term. So the biggest threat that he has talked about, and you heard that in the UN General Assembly speech also, is illegal immigration. Or even sometimes he talks about immigration, whether it's legal or illegal, in the same breath. And he sees that as the biggest threat, which is changing Western societies. There is, a kind of racist undertone to this, and also to Pete Hegseth's speech to his generals, because he talked about how the US military has been weakened as a result of wrong political policies in the past, particularly diversity, inclusion, and equity policies, and basically said that they are not going to have these policies anymore, and that they have also axed several senior members of the military who they felt had been brought in on grounds of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that this that the standards in the military will now be based on male standards, so women, no exceptions, etc. So it's a very kind of exclusivist speech for the US military, which has been the biggest force for integration of minorities into a cohesive unit. A lot of Black, a lot of Hispanic, a lot of minorities joined the army because it provided them an opportunity. And if this is going to change, it means there will be a fundamental shift in terms of how the military has always viewed itself as a secular, inclusive force representing all American citizens. Secondly, this whole emphasis that the army will be deployed for internal security purposes, that already you have the military deployed along the border with Mexico in certain areas. You've had the National Guards called out for immigration. You've had National Guards called out in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and perhaps now one other city, Portland. And I think that this is a very confusing agenda for the US military, because they're really not trained for civilian duties. They are trained to shoot to kill. That's the army's job. So unless there really is a crisis, how the army is going to be deployed, what role it will play, how it will cohere this in their doctrines, all that remains to be seen. And on the global stage, we are seeing signals of some kind of retreat by the US, accepting, a more limited sphere of influence in the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. In fact, the conversation that Pete Hegseth had with his counterpart in China basically gave China three assurances. One, that they do not seek a conflict with China. Okay, that's nothing new. And that has been the US line, that they don't want an inadvertent conflict with China, and that they'd rather have managed competition. Two, he said that they do not seek regime change in China. And three, he said that they do not seek to strangulate China. Now, what that means, we don't know. Is it economic? They do not want to apply sanctions on China, or they will, reduce the salience of groupings which were meant to balance China in the Indo-Pacific. I think this remains to be seen. He also, of course, said that the US has interests in the Indo-Pacific and will act robustly to protect them, but in a very general way. Nothing specific about freedom of navigation, freedom of overflights, which the US has always talked about in the past, especially in the context of a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is consistent with international law and norms. No mention of that. So I think it's a period where US policy is very much in the melting pot. what is going to emerge from this, because the formal, national security policy or defense policy, I think, have still to be formalized and should be out after some time. Then we'll have a clearer picture, because they'll be forced to actually put down specifically what they intend.
Thank you, Ambassador Shankar. That was very detailed. I think, especially what is so it's all rather frightening. I mean, one has never seen the U.S. in this light, and in terms of what you said, a secular, inclusive force, and that is clearly not the case. And he's talking to this room full of generals, and there was absolute silence after he spoke. I mean, nobody applauded. I mean, I don't know what those people were thinking. I'm going to hand over to Lieutenant General Dushan Singh here on in taking this forward.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. I was off air because of my connection went off, and so therefore you had to take on the baton. Good that you did it. A warm welcome to all of you. My initial approach would be that I will cover the basic highlights of the meeting. That would be about 3 slides. What Ambassador Meera has just said, essentially she has covered the key issues of it, but when we go through the actual words of these people, what they have spoken, it is really, really very surprising at the standards of standards of public speech. I mean, I was quite amazed by the fact that it may have been a crowd of army generals, but even in this case of army generals, when people speak to them, whether they are prime minister or the president of any country, I don't think they use such word what they have used. So I'll go straight to the presentation. First of all, my headline itself, this particular meeting was held in Marine Corps Base, Quantico, Virginia on 30th September, which most of you would be aware. But what my headline says, Trump continues to Trump, which means that, I wanted to replace Trump by trampling. This is what exactly he's doing to his internal strengths. I mean, the strength which actually gave the global power and global governance power to the United States of America. I think he's actually harming more than assisting or enabling or empowering his own military. So if you look at the key themes of the talks of the two, first of all it was essentially anti-woke reforms. That was the first thing which came out, and in that, what Ambassador Shankar just mentioned, banning the DEI, you know, people like dudes in dresses, fitness, grooming mandate, unkempt beard. While it is good to pass such instructions, because the US Army over a period of time was getting more and more casual, but to say it in such words where diversity and equity and inclusion were to be banned, I think that is something which is absolutely anti a democratic country. The message is totally different when it goes out like that. Then you had the implicit support, as far as Trump said, he was actually supporting the fact that the current leadership is very strong and the previous leadership was not very strong, and therefore it was not able to inculcate the kind of discipline, kind of approach which the military force must have in its activities when they were undertaking any deployments. I think right from 30th April, I was in the US when this thing happened. From the 30th of April, Secretary of War now, he's changed the name back to the Second World War designation. Instead of Secretary of Defense, he's known as Secretary of War. He issued a guideline for the US Army, the reforms which they need to be which they need to change. I think probably they were not happy with the directions and the change which were taking place in the U.S. Army. So this is the one of the reasons why I feel this meeting of 800 top generals, including 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star generals, was called over, basically to prepare for war from within. I feel, and Ambassador Meera and Vivek both can comment on it, they are feeling weak from inside. The current leadership seems to be feeling very weak from inside, so they are trying to impose this thing that your duty is also to ensure internal security. Homeland security has suddenly become very important here over Indo-Pacific, which they have started now calling it as Asia Pacific. If you see the readout which Secretary Hexeth has given, he says Asia Pacific. Suddenly they are trying to change certain narratives. As far as Trump is concerned, he was saying that blue cities. Basically, he was mentioning wherever the democratic states were there, there is an uprising internally. So we need to crush them. We need to crush them by using military. Very, 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 very. I would say uh, statements which were not expected in the US in the past. They are saying that in the modern history of warfare, this is the first time that they have got such a large crowd in one place. People left without telling their command. The operations actually stopped when these leaders left their place to go to Virginia for this particular talk. Then global posturing. I think the thing that please cut the uh, float, which means outside deployment. Now this has a great impact on the global order in the future. Are they trying to tone down the global governance? That is one issue. If they do that, then their strength in Asia, Indo-Pacific, if it reduces, that it increases the Chinese intention of being much more bolder in achieving their aims. That is another point which we need to consider. And here we may see a boundary dispute escalating between India and China. So to some extent, India is also getting impacted by this. The last, as far as Trump is concerned, he bragged about past deals, hints at World War III, and indirectly he was pitching for Nobel Peace Prize. I think he openly said that
He
that
did.
rather than saying they will give it to someone who may not have done anything about peace. Here I am, I've done so much for peace, etc., etc. This is somehow mind-boggling to me, at least in my life. Since I gained consciousness, I've never heard such kind of a open pitch for awards, etc. Loyalty, I think that is the last bit which is important of both the speeches. As far as Hexeth is concerned, he used a word which normally a leader of a nation or minister of a nation would not use. FAFO. I don't want to even full form it. FA or find out, which is a direct threat to the enemy that if you decide to go against us, now without saying that it is for India or for any other country, there is an indirect message hidden for everyone that if you are going to oppose the US, they will not stop short of any kind of means to put you under their influence or under their. And finally, towards the end, I think Trump could not withstand the deafening silence in the hall. Nobody was even winking. Sorry, even shaking their heads. That was the kind of environment which was there in that particular hall. And I think Trump is looking at something very, very serious coming and hitting him. He may not realize it now. In the short term, he may be getting away with it. But in the long term, I think America is going to see something very, very, very major internally. As such, the ratings, popularity ratings, sorry, Pew popularity ratings have gone down as far as Trump is concerned. Although the MAGA group still holds a lot of sway, I think it's around 43 or 44%. But there are people on the other side who are absolutely against this thing. You also find that there is going to be a no budget period going to happen because the Senate has stopped or it has asked for some changes in the bill, etc. We will see a lot of ups and downs as far as US is concerned, and because of that, there will be a global impact on it. So I will not go any more further from here, but ask Vivek to pitch in with what he thinks is going to be the short and the long term implications of this kind of an approach where Trump is trampling everything just to get mileage, personal mileage. I would put it that way, personal mileage, and trying to play into the MAGA narrative which he has been launching for. Whether it is tariffs, whether it is visa, whether it is this meeting of generals pulling out from areas, peace deal in Gaza. I think everywhere there is an I which is floating around. So your views, Vivek, quickly, and then We will revert back to Ambassador.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. I think initially, when the call for this meeting came out, I mean the murmurs around Beltway was that this was probably happening in the background of the Venezuela
Yeah.
context. You know, there was that there would be an imminent attack on Venezuela. Because some of the F-35s had been scrambled closer to that region, but what really came out of the meeting was in many ways very disappointing, both in the United States to the folks in the United States and outside, in the sense that, I mean, as it was laid out, there were three important benchmark or tests. One was fitness, grooming, and the whole idea of the going back to the old. And I think somewhere there is a sense of that golden age of America that Trump often refers to, in the whole, and that streak is present in the whole speech if we read between the lines, because essentially Hegseth applied the 1990 test to everything, which is broadly saying that anything after 1990 that has come up in the military or the developments is subject to suspicion. Something is wrong with that. And I think is often referred to that old standard. So I think that the golden age of America is something, in some way, there's an undertone to this whole exercise. That is one. The second is, I think, definitely there is a recoil in the US policy, in the sense that it's trying to look within more than outside, as was laid out. Portland is now heated. There's been Chicago, DC has been, there's been deployment. Los Angeles, I think, faced quite a tense moment in deployments because of the court, because some things went to the court. And Gavin Newsom it gave immense political clout to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and actually, in my opinion, catapulted him quite a bit in the upcoming for the upcoming Democrat versus Republican divide, possibly for the presidential spot, because I think for some time we were all scrambling for a face in the Democratic side. I think Gavin Newsom to some extent has stood out. Now, so there is a legal dimension to this. One is, of course, in the context of Portland. The 1878 rule of the Posse Comitatus Act, that you cannot use military for internal policing, is something that has come out. I presume that all of this will go to the court again, and how it violates some of the internal policies of the United States. But I think what stood out most sort of strikingly is that there is a standard being talked about in the military that is actually, that is not in sync with the requirements of the age today. So on the one hand, you're talking about improving the standards of the military, but there was no mention of technology. There was no mention of the competitive edge that China and the United States today are dwelling with. So one of the criticisms of this is, of course, that if you have to justify a steep hike in the military budget, which is now 1 trillion and above, with increasing the standards, the physical standards, what about the tech standards? Essentially, which is the main thing that will eventually catapult the United States ahead of the curve vis-a-vis China. So I think that the tech standard versus physical standard gap is also something that has come up in this. And third, of course, aspect of the recoil policy of the United States is certainly external, which is, if you look at, there's been a consistent hint to the fact that the Indo-Pacific is down in the priority list. I mean, I don't want to speculate on whether what happens to the Quad, but I think there is a strong presumption, or at least a question mark over the fact that when the Quad will happen, what will be the context. And there's a great degree of apprehension whether Trump will travel to this part of the world. And if he does, what are the other repercussions that can come up with this travel? And consistently, there's also the emphasis on the idea of the Asia Pacific more now compared to the Indo-Pacific. Now, Trump can switch any moment, and all of this can change. That's a caveat. That's a strong caveat. But today, essentially, the onus of the burden sharing is very clear. Externally, the United States wants its partners to step up. And I think much of that conversation will be the next round of foreign policy projections from the United States. The first round is, of course, a focus on the domestic ideas, on the domestic so-called threats that Trump perceives. But I think even domestically, going back to the time that Trump refers to the golden age, cities like Chicago, cities like Los Angeles, will be very difficult to be carved in the image that Trump wants them to, which is essentially there's everything is fine, there's no conflict there. And there are certain studies that Republican cities, there are many Republican cities being governed by Republicans, which have high crime rates. So I think that that comparison is also something that is blunting the idea of securing America today from within. And lastly, I think the xenophobic undertones that the foreign policy and even first, I think the domestic policy and then foreign policy of Donald Trump has today is going to impact its and in real time is impacting the foreign policy of the United States in virtually all geographies today. I mean, even with a country like Iran, I think we saw day before 2 or 3 planes being filled with people being deported back to Iran. So I think within all this, he's trying to look out for successes where there's none. I mean, there's hardly any conflict that Donald Trump, the 7 conflicts that he talks about having settled. I think the genie has not been put back in the bottle. I think for the only, positive sign or the only relative calm in most of the conflicts that I see today that Trump has achieved is only perhaps between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but even that is subject to a strong caveat. But other conflicts, I mean, if you look at Congo, if you look at the African conflicts, it's still on in some way or the other. The India-Pakistan conflict has been rebuffed from India's side. The Operation Sindoor is still on. So on every count, the Trumpian narrative can be countered on how he has played a role in conflict resolution. So I think there is a huge dichotomy between what Trump claims and what is actually happening on the ground. And plus, I think just before I end, I think the emphasis that Ambassador Meera Shankar highlighted that Trump is trying to consolidate his foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. I think that is the easiest domain to sort of, in terms of foreign policy, to try and sort of challenge or test out the Trumpian policy of the Trumpian military doctrine in some geography. And I think that is something that could happen anytime. At least my sense is that Donald Trump will try and militarily do something in that region. So I think essentially this is the beginning of the arc of, let's say, if you want to refer to the military, it's the Hegseth doctrine, and if you want to call it the presidential doctrine, it is the Trump doctrine.
Okay, I think there are 2-3 important questions which I would like Ambassador Meera Shankar to focus on, because your initial remarks were in an overall perspective. I would like you to elaborate on this whole switch of Indo-Pacific to Asia-Pacific. What is behind this? And is it also to do with some kind of pulling out? Because, the second remark which was made was cut the bloat. That means basically people don't want too much of a deployment, whether it is in the West Asian region or whether it is in the Far East and the Southeast Asian region or Africa for that matter. So could you just elaborate on this, and what could be then thereafter the implications for India, especially coming from China and also Pakistan? Over to you, ma'am.
Who
Ma'am, you're
first?
mute.
Sorry, it's not mute.
Now it's okay. Now we can hear you.
Okay. I think it was Trump who coined the phrase Indo-Pacific during his first term. It was used.
Yes.
And now they've shifted, though sometimes they use Indo-Pacific, sometimes they're still
Some.
using Indo-Pacific. I think Asia-Pacific has been used by Pete Hegseth
Yes.
in his, conversation with his Chinese counterpart. So we have to read the tea leaves. We have to wait and see if this means that they will give less priority to China as a geostrategic threat to the United States. Because if you recall the Biden doctrine, the national security doctrine, it had talked of Russia as an immediate threat, which
Yes.
the US will work to contain. And on the other side, had talked of China as the one country with both the intention and increasingly the capability to challenge the United States. But the US had said that they do not seek conflict with China, but they will outcompete China in every area which matters. So that was roughly the policy which the Biden administration was following, and their administration was also following a policy of strengthening ties with allies, alliance partners, as well as strategic partners to shore up a kind of better balance in Asia vis-a-vis China. So you see this with the kind of deployments in the Philippines, the new defense agreement, the strengthening of ties with Japan and South Korea, the trilateral US, Japan, South Korea trilateral, AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, and of course the Quad, which included a non alliance partner, that was India, which is a strategic partner of the United States. Now, whether the US is no longer going to focus on the geostrategic aspects of the China challenge, I think is something we have to wait and see. Clearly, Trump does see China as an economic challenge to the United States. And initially, he came on a platform of taking very, very strong action against China, imposed 145% tariffs on all Chinese imports, but then was forced to walk back from that when China used its leverage by putting a block on the export of rare earths and critical minerals, which impacted all US, strategic as well as tech industries, including renewable energy, electric cars, semiconductors, missiles, drones, etc. So it impacted the range of US, strategic and tech industries. So the US then had a temporary truce with China on the tariff front, giving more time for negotiations for a final deal. And then the tariff has been brought down to 30%, which means that along with the tariffs which were there earlier, effectively means that tariffs on China are a little above 50%. But the truce has been continued. No sanctions, no increase in tariffs. The truce has been extended till November to give more time for negotiations. And President Trump is talking of a meeting with President Xi. He keeps praising him. And therefore, it's quite clear that he is giving a lot of priority to doing a deal with China on the economic side, having realized that it's not so easy to punish or hurt China economically without hurting itself, because China has leverage through its dominance of rare earths and critical minerals, which can create a vulnerability for the United States. So that is where we are with regard to the Indo Pacific or Asia Pacific. And we have to wait and see, because, you know, many US administrations, including, let's take it, President Obama, began with a posture of what they called strategic reassurance to China. That is, if the US reassured China on respecting its core interests, including Tibet, Taiwan, or whatever else China described as its core interests, Hong Kong, that then China would cooperate with the US on global issues. It didn't happen that way. And by the end of the Obama term, there was a complete switch in policy with the pivot towards Asia, you know, redeploying, the proposed redeployment of US forces. At the moment, there are 60-50 or 60-40 naval forces.
Yeah.
60 in the Atlantic, 40 in the Indo-Pacific, to redeploy it in the reverse ratio, 60% in the Indo-Pacific, 40% in Europe. But they have never really been able to implement this, because first you had the Ukraine war, and then there's always something erupting in the Middle East or elsewhere, which draws the US focus. But whether Trump intends to follow this or cut back, because while increasing the defense budget, the proposal is $1 trillion for the defense budget, he wants to cut back on manpower and on deployments overseas. So they've already, you know, done a reduction. How they are going to manage this again is something which remains. There are very many imponderables, because in a sense it's politicizing the army. In a sense, it is absolutely politicizing the army. The army has been an apolitical instrument. It's professional, and it has always served US strategic interests overseas. Now it's going to be used internally, and for what, we really don't know. How the legal challenge to this, which will take place, how the legal challenge will play out remains to be seen. But as of now, courts have been giving Trump quite a bit of leeway, even where they disagree with him, like on tariffs. They have said that he has exceeded his authority. The
Yes.
authority to impose tariffs lies only with the Congress, not with the president. But Trump has used some economic emergency powers to impose the tariffs. And of course, the court has held there's no economic emergency, but has not chosen to actually stay the operation of the tariffs, giving time for Trump to appeal, and it will go all the way up to the Supreme Court. What view the Supreme Court is going to take, we don't know, but it is like, I would say, it bends the needle towards the conservative or right causes. So we have to wait and see.
Yeah. Before I go further, I would like, because you've been in the US for quite some time, and
Yes.
there is this thing about the DEI, yeah, DEI, in which they have specifically focused on the gender part of it. Going by the western coast of America, which is more in the terms of I would say expression pro DEI. Do you think there will be some internal problems within the armed forces of the United States of America, or they are professional enough to overcome this short-term implementation strategy of the United States of America? Before I get in,
Well,
Vivek,
it,
I would like you to come. on this issue?
Yeah,
We,
sure. There has always been a difference between the east and west coasts, which have been more liberal and outward looking towards the world, more internationalist, and hinterland America, which has tended to be more focused on itself. And we are seeing that play out now. And clearly, there are huge culture wars going on in the United States, right from the withdrawal of Roe v. Wade, which had legalized abortion, which is now sought to be rolled back, and many states have indeed rolled it back, Republican ruled states, which I think women don't, many women are extremely anxious about the changes which are taking place, which are rolling back many of the hard won gains over the years. And as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion is concerned, the bulk, many soldiers in the US Army are from the minorities and also from the working class. A lot of the poorer
Mexicans.
people, no, poorer white people also join the army, but it's been a huge opportunity and melting pot. Will they get enough recruitment if they actually exclude this rainbow? You know, will there be enough white recruitment? Because unfortunately, uh, the MAGA agenda or Trump's agenda, while they hark back to a golden age for the United States, that harking back is in terms of reasserting white dominance over the polity and economy. It expresses their anxiety about possible demographic changes which might occur. They're quite far away. Nobody is making the whites a minority today. But unfortunately, this is a factor which is triggering anxiety in the United States and in Europe and informing many of their priorities and policies and political movements today.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll move on to Vivek. Vivek, uh,
Can I
uh,
just come in for 1 second?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is, I mean, this is on the whole looking outwards at, what allies are expected to do. And they've said it often enough that allies must come up. Two things. One is during this speech, also he said allies and partners have to share the burden. Real military leadership is what we're looking for. And then at Shangri-La, he said we expect everyone to come to increase their defense budgets to 5% of GDP. So I am wondering if this is what we are going looking at in terms of future Indo-US, our kind of the dialogue that is going to go ahead. They're saying you have a problem, we expect you to put the money up front and deal with it. That is how they're treated West Asia, and that's how they're looking at Europe. So your thoughts, Vivek, on this?
Yeah, in
Well,
fact, my question was related exactly to the point which Dr. Tara was asking. Uh, the the fact that EU is supposedly the closest ally of US, it has not treated EU in the same manner as what Dr. Tara Kartha has highlighted also. So this pivot to Western hemisphere also to me looks a little bit of a, under a question, under a doubtful strategy. And maybe that is the reason why they are saying, look, you guys fight your own battle, increase your budget to 5%. Moment you increase your budget to 5% of your GDP, definitely they will start looking at their own armies and their own, except for the nuclear cover. Even the nuclear cover is there. You got UK, you got France, Germany, and all don't have it, but they have it in location. So, how do you see this development of the situation which Dr. Tara Kartha has just highlighted? And this pivot to Western Hemisphere to me looks like just a mirage. Over to you.
yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think, the entire idea of increasing the military budget to 5% will remain something. I mean, Trump can try and overreach, take this narrative to beyond the allies, but I think it will remain limited in its implementability. within the allied structure of the United States. Despite, I mean, it cannot tomorrow create a diktat and say, well, India will have to raise its defense budget to 5%. It will not cut muster with countries like India and mostly in the Indo-Pacific. With allies, especially in the context of nuclear deterrence, I think that question is important because not just because of the allied, the hub and the spoke system in the Asia Pacific, and the transatlantic alliance with Europe, but also in the sense that in the background you have a Russia-Ukraine war going on for close to 3 years or even more, where the nuclear question has been raked up more than once, and I think that proximity that has increased with nuclear, with a possible nuclear fallout, uh, has forced allies to think on certain lines. I think at the back of this narrative, essentially what Trump is trying to do is to arm twist nations to essentially force them to do more, which he has succeeded to do in the case of Europe, in exactly the fashion that he wanted, which was that America will not put boots on the ground. Essentially, you buy it from the US, the NATO will buy from the US, and then will deploy in Europe. And that's what that Trump has been successful in achieving that, because now he has categorically said that I'm ready to sell weapons to and even increase of in the case of deployments within Europe. What has changed is essentially NATO deployments and not US deployments. I mean, there would be sparse US troops here and there, but I think broadly it's the NATO deployments. For example, in Finland, there's a new deployment of NATO forces. So I think Trump is trying to achieve that. Now, the reason that will not cut muster in a space like the Indo-Pacific, Asia Pacific, it might, but in the Indo-Pacific, it will not, because simply the distance, the relative distance that a country like India has with the US, the buffer zone that we have in terms of dealing with the United States does provide certain advantages in warding off the pressure from Washington. So I think that's a relatively comfortable space for countries that are in this part of the world. And I think what Trump's narrative has also done is really push into corner a band of countries that are now standing up in some way or the other to the whole Trumpian narrative. You have Brazil, you have India in many ways standing up to the United States, while it is still talking and keeping a conciliatory tone to the United States in terms of trade. So you have Russia and China, which essentially are also talking to the US, but trying to band together in on grounds of a similar thought. So I think those challenges will play out in the Indo-Pacific as well as in the Middle East. Now, I think the undertone of Trump's foreign policy or military policy has been laid out consistently by him and his team, which is that there will be no boots on the grounds. The U.S. will not get involved in the war in a war, and I think that will remain the consistent policy of Donald Trump, even as he will try new methods. For example, there has been in the last week there have been new deployments in the Middle East because the Houthis have apparently tore up or are about to tear up the agreement that they have with the US. And also, I think in terms of the United States' commitment to the Indo-Pacific, and the reason why we are talking about this possible shift to the Asia Pacific from the Indo-Pacific, even if it is a modulated shift, is because in the past few weeks we've seen a Pentagon review of the AUKUS, and they have categorically said that the AUKUS is safe. There are no words on similar lines about the Quad, for instance. And I know I'm comparing oranges and apples because Quad and AUKUS are two different things. But essentially, no word in terms of what is a roadmap. Is there a roadmap for Quad? And this was India's year to chair. It is a critical year. behind the curtains, there are essentially talks about synchronizing the Quad. The 16 or the 15 working groups that we have in the Quad, can we synchronize it to 4 or 5 and make it more consolidated? So it remains an opportunity, and from Delhi's vantage point, I think it is an important meeting, or an important year, but it remains without Washington's consensus, or at least a vocal one. So those are questions to my mind in terms of a possible shift that is happening in real time and playing out, even as Trump prioritizes a very hard domestic policy.
Okay, we are running out of time, so I'll ask a very short question and quick response, and thereafter we will move on to the question box, because in the chat box also there are a number of questions. My question is, I have a counter theory. We see that the Americans are slowly arriving at some kind of a improvement. I won't say improvement in relationship, or hands-off approach to China. By way of saying, I mean, you read the readout of uh, Secretary Peter Hegseth also. There seems to be, how should I say, uh, also an approach by the US that if in any global conflict, they are unlikely to be committing support the way they had been doing it in the past. So there is a theory which is going around that world will start feeling insecure. This may also lead to India buying more defense products from the United States of America. Do you think that this is an effort to ensure that India remains hooked on to the US as far as buying of defense equipment, weapons, etc., is concerned, so that we are willy-nilly dependent on the US? Because
Let me
Russia itself is overstretched, and Russia to meet up our requirements may be very difficult. So we'll first have Ambassador, and then Vivek speaking about it. And in the end, I would also request Dr. Tara to also pitch in with her comments. Over to you all. Over to
Look,
Ambassador.
so clearly, the US would like us to buy more defense equipment from the United States. They've also signaled that the discussions with regard to the GE F414 engine are still on, the collaboration for the Tejas Mark II. But I think if the relationship with India becomes so, if with the US becomes so unpredictable for India, where it's actually causing economic pain and strategic uncertainty, I think India will have a question about whether to buy equipment from the United States at all, particularly offensive equipment. Can you trust them as a partner? How will they behave in a possible Indo-Pak conflict? Surveillance equipment, maybe transport equipment, but will you then actually trust them as a partner for offensive equipment? That is a question. And the same will hold for the US's other partners if the credibility of the US nuclear umbrella comes into question, both in Europe as well as in East Asia. You are going to see perhaps demands for, like in Europe, it is France which is talking about extending the French nuclear umbrella to European
Yes.
countries, or maybe a France UK joint umbrella to other European countries. In Japan and South Korea, there have been off and on voices talking about the need for a nuclear deterrent, which way it's going to go, if there is, if there are doubts about the credibility of the US commitment, I think is something which we will have to watch. And for India also, I think you cannot take the relationship with the US for granted, that irrespective of what the US does to you, the relationship will continue in the same way. There will be an erosion of trust, and that's not easy to rebuild. So at the moment,
I,
you have their officers like, their Commerce Secretary Lutnick basically saying We have to fix countries like India, Brazil, etc., Switzerland.
Yes.
So basically,
Switzerland is Switzerland is wondering why we have been targeted.
and why they have been lumped with BRICS.
Absolutely, absolutely. Probably they didn't understand the S part of it. South Africa was mistaken as Switzerland. Vivek, Vivek, a quick comment by you on this
Yeah.
issue, and then I'll ask Dr. Tara the question. I'll give you in advance. That besides the question which I asked the ambassador and Vivek, we are still continuing with our under the radar activities. India and the US. What is this game going on? So, Vivek, you first comment on the question which I had asked, and I'll ask Dr. Tara to comment on the other game, under the radar, over the radar activities which are going on. Yeah,
Yeah, so quickly, I think I couldn't agree more with Ambassador Shankar. But here, I mean, my thought on this is that the Trump phase will prove to be a cautionary tale for India going forward in terms of where do you really put where exactly put the money where the mouth is. Um, Now, but the broad arc of India's trajectory is, of course, that in terms we are at the cusp of the fourth or the fifth the technological evolution or revolution, as you call it, with AI, quantum robotics. Now, if you consider those things, what are your options on the table for India? One is that you speed up the domestic processes. Um, and can you do that to really fill the gap that you have in the short span of time that you have? If you can, very good. If you can't, then your natural trajectory in the area of technology really lies with the West, because the other option is China, where you will not go. So I think I'll leave it there.
yeah. I think there is a problem for India in the sense, how should it pitch itself in the case we have a kind of a not so good relationship with the United States of America or the West in general. We do have options of France, Israel, etc., but those also are subject to the US nod. Over to you, Dr. Tara. We are still having, despite all this Trump, MAGA, and things like that, we are still having a lot of activities, joint exercises, military exercises. The trade talks are going on. What is all this going on? Is it realism in play? Over to you.
I mean, there is a strong realism. If you see the chairman, Joint Chief of Staff's comments, you see Peter Hegseth's comments, you see the budget papers. They're talking about China. And just 2 days ago, we had that discussion on the secret US document saying that China is preparing to invade Taiwan. You had Hegseth saying that this is a done deal. They are getting ready. This is it's a very spot on thread. That is the other side of it. But I just quickly want to raise one question, which I've been sort of struggling to understand. Okay, so this is the Pentagon has told the defense industry that you guys have to quadruple your defense production. We don't have anything. That half of their systems have gone to Ukraine, some of it has gone to Israel. So there is, in fact, what Ambassador Shankar said about the engines, that the problem is become US capability to deliver. Quite apart from what you might or might not want, they are in that way. Trump is actually not too wrong. The US defense industrial base has eroded. So this is what they're trying to do. But to come to the India thing, I think the fact that there's a congressional delegation coming, I mean, the US visitors continue to arrive. We've had the intersessional 2+2 dialogue. We've had
Yeah.
all this goes on fundamentally because I think there is a defense bureaucracy from within the Pentagon who realize that there is a problem here and we have to deal with it. And they continue to engage with Australia and Japan, though Japan and Trump have major political issues, but the military to military dialogues continue. So I don't think this is, I mean, there is a huge problem but in reality, If he is outsourcing everything this side and that side and tells the military, okay, now look inwards, then he needs you that much more. So your importance may very well increase rather than decrease if the US military, as Ambassador Shankar says, is going to be reduced in numbers, scope, their weapons. Then he's going to rely on allies, which is exactly what he's saying. He says the allies and partners have to step up. So I think that's what we are going to have to be very, very prepared for.
So it is a world with confusion as of now. Everybody is trying to look for pathways to steer their national interest and sovereign interest. So I think it's a wait and watch period. We have to look at things as they come out, but at the same time I think we need to ensure that our security preparedness remains, because we are the only country possibly in the world which faces a live threat almost on a daily basis. We don't know when some major attack will take place, of whether it is terrorist attack or whatever it is, especially in the hinterland. Then it becomes even more difficult for you to connect it with our adversary, giving proofs, etc., etc. So we are really sitting on a tinderbox. That's the way I look at it, and we need to focus on that. With that, Akashika, can you go on to the questions, because there are many of them. Thank Mr. Ramchandran for becoming the member of the class YouTube channel. Thank you, Ramachandran, and you can then take on the questions, Akashika. Are you there or you left?
I think she's.
Okay, so I'll start with the person who has asked the question, because since he's become a member, what is the future for Indo-Pacific naval partnership, Indonesia and Quad instead of US? He's trying to de-link the US. So I suppose best person for this would be Vivek, or both of you can comment, Ambassador and Mr. Vivek. A quick comment by each of you. You mute, ma'am.
Okay, the question is if Indonesia becomes a member of the Quad in lieu of the US or in lieu of us.
Instead of US. Instead of US.
Um, you know, uh, well, I think it will continue, just like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which was the trade agreement which the Obama administration had concluded as part of their pivot to Asia, and Trump withdrew the US from that agreement in the first term. But Japan steered it, and then they had an agreement minus the US. So that was it. But of course, it doesn't have the kind of weight that it would without the US, but would be useful nevertheless, because regional powers would have more permanent interests, not fluctuating priorities in this region.
You want to say anything, Vivek?
Yeah, I just quickly want to add to that point, in the sense that if you take America out, America brings very sui generis components to the table in terms of the balance of power. We have tried, in the absence of America, you will see the already existing trilaterals that we have. You have the JAI, Japan, America, India, or you have the France, UAE, and India. You could see those models already working out and take a guess in terms of where it will go. We've also talked about the Squad, including South Korea, for instance, in the Pacific. But it'll lose out on the strategic and the military and the balance of power bit if you take out America broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the heft will be out of the Quad, and Quad will become something like the ASEAN Forum, etc. I don't
Yeah.
think it. And then the Anglo-Saxon sanction guys also getting into this is very rare. The Saxon country like Australia might just feel away from it. My a little lightening up of the environment. So I thought, let me just share this comment of one of our viewers, so that we have a smile on our faces. Ma'am, while considering the high killing rate of the Chinese PLA general staff, he's basically referring to the purges. Over 90 generals have now been purged as far as China is concerned, Trump may be considering to offer American generals, because even the Americans are purging their generals to see as kind of or even a trading G2 your views. So don't have to give the views. It was just to make all of you laugh, and thanks for that, Akash, for sharing a little bit of humor in this good discussion. I'll go to the next question, which is yeah. Uh, Peter Hegseth is milking every ounce of the role given to him as the head of the War Department, Secretary of War. Uh, Anything you want to say on this?
Well,
Basically, I think he was a reporter,
Fox,
journalist, CNN
Fox,
journalist, or something.
No, Fox News.
Fox TV, Fox
Fox
TV
News,
host.
yeah. He was on the Fox TV, and suddenly he's trying to correct the U.S. Army, which has been there for last so many years, fought so many wars. They have a rich legacy of war fighting, and here he is trying to improve them. Maybe he's commenting on that. Quick word, Vivek, you want to say something on this?
Uh, yeah, I mean, Pete Hegseth is, as you know, the American narrative is that he shouldn't be in that position. I mean, that's the broad consensus outside the Trumpian MAGA world. I think even within the MAGA world, there was some dissension after the Signal fiasco that happened, and one of the things that he has done in his speech recently is that is trying to change the role of the inspector general within the Pentagon, and
Yes.
he is himself awaiting a report from the inspector general for the Signal fiasco. So there is a huge question about Trump. He's trying to correct something that he knows nothing about. But there are many more points, but I'll leave it there.
I think he
Uh,
also has
yeah,
a somewhat, conflictual relationship with some of the top military brass.
that's
So
why he
that is
purged some
something,
people.
yeah. So he's not yet. I think his leadership is still not fully accepted within the establishment, defense establishment. He has to uh, prove himself.
So do you think the current cabinet of the Trump administration 2.0 is lacking in experience, because the way they have appointed people at the top places, I don't think they have that deep rooted experience of managing governance. Am I correct, or I'm making a very bold statement beyond my pay grade?
Well, he has this time chosen loyalty above everything else. That's
Yeah.
been his
Absolutely.
core test.
Yeah.
And it's a very top down decision making process, highly centralized. So, how much autonomy his cabinet ministers can exercise is also questionable. I think Trump basically decides most things himself, and the kind of established way of decision making, institutionalized way of decision making, has become weaker. It's far more centralized and focused in the person of the president.
Yeah. Any one of you, Dr. Tara and Vivek, want to comment?
Yeah, I think Trump has shown this consistently. He has overridden Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. He has overridden DNI Tulsi Gabbard on several occasions. So he has shown that he's the last word, and I think that's how the Trump administration functions, on absolute loyalty, and there's no other metric, I suppose.
I think
Okay.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
that kind
Yeah.
of
Go ahead.
explains why Pakistan is at the center of his focus. There's nobody to advise him. So,
Okay. Yeah. He's gaining a lot of mileage, from a organization, and I think it all started with Kurilla's pushing up through the military to military engagement. Kurilla was able to push this guy closer to Trump, and then the whole thing has turned on
there's
its
just
head.
one comment I just quickly want to make is that
Mhm.
it is a problem for us is that for the immediate future, it is CENTCOM which is central to the whole exercise. That is
Absolutely.
for us. And in that,
That's
it is Pakistan which is sort of clawing its way up. PACOM is nowhere as of now. So that we're going to have to know how to deal with this.
you
No,
see,
it's the
India,
focus.
India,
Focus is
India
on
is
Iran and Afghanistan, and Pakistan has always learned how to trade
milk.
its
Yes,
geophysical
Correct.
location
It's
to
it's
advantage,
it's
but actually it has sunk Pakistan because it's got used to living beyond its means, and it has
correct.
absolutely radicalized the Pakistani polity. It has sunk the economy because you
absolutely.
get used to living beyond your means.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So there is another explanation which one of our audience has given, Siddharth Vijayan. He says, I think DI crackdown they intended is more about toning down the LGBTQ friendliness of the forces. Uh, this is a debate which has been going on in even in the our armed forces. So there are certain issues which are troubling maybe the internally also. So whatever thing is being said by the leadership, maybe they are also taking some kind of a feedback. Anything you want to say in this?
I think it's one of the issues which the MAGA and the right, the new Republican Party, as I call it, because it's not the traditional Republican Party, uh, is made an item in its culture wars for America's soul, and that is that they don't recognize homosexuality, that they, so on and so forth. So delegitimize it, that is their agenda, and that is what is playing out. But it's certainly more than that, because some of the generals who have been sacked include women, include blacks. It's not just limited to gays in the military and the problem that might arise as a result of this. It has a much broader agenda.
There are some very interesting questions, but since the time is running out, I would not be taking up. So I'll request the audience, please put it during the YouTube channel's viewership later on, because all these chats will go away once the live chat is over. So with that, it leaves me to just thank all three of you, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Vivek, and Dr. Tara. It has been lovely, very, very insightful, and very, very exciting debate. We had material to get excited about. I mean, I would put it that way also. But there was a lot of issues which we could have actually labored upon more, but due to limited time frame, I think this much has also been very interesting. Thank you very much, Jai Hind, and till we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.